No one knows you like you know yourself. These celebs were so self-aware that they managed to predict their lives down to the very last minute.
Musicians often live the craziest lives, and far too many have lost their lives before even hitting 30. However, some musicians have predicted their own deaths in a way that's weirdly accurate. There's no denying that Tupac Shakur will go down in history as one of the greatest rappers of all time. Part of what made him such an iconic figure was his intelligent understanding of society and culture.
I believe strongly that my audience empathize with me because I show that side. I show that emotion, raw, uncut, good and bad.
The man who made thug life into a household phrase also had a strong feeling early on in his life that he'd never make it to old age. Back in 1994, an interviewer asked him where he thought he'd see himself in 15 years.
Best case, in the cemetery. Not in the cemetery. Sprinkled in ashes, smoked up by mahomies.
He quickly corrected this to say that that was a worst-case scenario, and he'd rather be a multimillionaire than dead. But that wasn't the only time Tupac expressed such certainty about an early death. In 1995, Tupac told Vibe magazine that he was giving them what he called his final interview, expressing a desire to have his story told accurately before he died. Then, in 1996, he filmed the music video I Ain't Mad At Ya, which depicted him in the afterlife, communicating with his loved ones. Just a few weeks later, Tupac's life ended in a drive-by shooting in Las Vegas. He was only 25 years old. Lisa Lopez, best known as Left Eye of TLC, was only 30 years old in 2002. But her life had already become an explosive cocktail of controversial headlines, domestic abuse, and public fallouts. That year, Lopez flew to Honduras for a recovery sabbatical and to film a documentary about her life. Throughout the documentary, her belief in premonitions was a focal point.
Which is funny, because whatever your fear is, it seems to manifest here, like that.
Sadly, things took a dark turn. A van she was riding in collided with a young boy who didn't survive his injuries. Though Left Eye had only been a passenger in the van, she still paid for all of the boy's hospital and funeral costs.
Can you tell the family that whatever they decide to do, we can help? Okay. Whatever choices they make.
According to documentary footage from the time, she was noticeably chilled by the fact that she and the boy shared a surname.
These are the shoes that belong to the little boy. And his last name was Lopez.
According to the documentary footage, she became convinced that some sort of malevolent spirit was following her, meaning to kill her instead of the boy. Later, while still in Honduras, the car Left Eye was driving swerved off the side of the road. The chilling moment was caught on film. She did not survive the crash. The world recoiled in shock when John Lennon was shot, but Lennon himself might have been less surprised than everyone else. Frida Kelly, who worked as a secretary for the Beatles when she was a teenager, told The Guardian, "The first thing that came into my mind when he died was that he used to say, 'I won't be here when I'm 40. I won't make 40. However, Kelly's story isn't the first time that someone has talked about Lennon's cynical expectations for his future. Newsweek revealed that all the way back in 1965, Lennon told a reporter his expectations for himself and his fellow bandmates, sharing, "We'll either go in a plane crash or we'll be popped off by some loony." He was right.
Lennon was shot and killed at about 11 o'clock last night outside his apartment building.
He was 40. The public generally accepts that Michael Jackson died from an overdose, but who was responsible? According to the courts, the answer was Jackson's doctor, Conrad Murray, who was found guilty of involuntary manslaughter. However, not everyone buys the notion that Jackson's death was an accident. The singer's daughter, Paris Jackson, told Rolling Stone she believes the truth is a lot more sinister and says everyone in her family agrees with her on this. She said, "He would drop hints about people being out to get him, and at some point he was like, 'They're gonna kill me one day.'" In his last weeks alive, Michael Jackson wrote letters to one of his closest friends claiming he was going to be murdered and was terrified for his life. Jackson's ex-wife, Lisa Marie Presley, once told a similar anecdote to Oprah regarding the singer's belief that someone wanted him dead, allegedly in order to seize the money from his music publishing catalog. What really happened? Was Jackson scared of a real threat, or was it just paranoia? Rapper José Duane Onfroy, known by his stage name XXXTentacion, rose to prominence after dropping his first track on SoundCloud in 2014 and releasing his first studio album in August 2017. But his musical success wasn't the only thing that came to define him. In 2016, his girlfriend accused him of assault and abuse, which she said was a frequent occurrence. In October that year, he allegedly strangled her, severely beat her, and locked her up for 2 days because she was pregnant. She went to the police, and X was arrested. The trial kept getting pushed back, all the way into 2018. At some point in early 2018, X posted a video to Instagram speaking straight to the camera.
"Mom's the worst, can die a tragic death or shit, and I'm not able to see out my dreams."
The court case never happened. On June 18, 2018, X was shot to death in Florida in what police believe was a drive-by shooting. He was 20 years old. The 1977 Lynyrd Skynyrd album Street Survivors was released just 3 days before the horrible plane crash that killed 3 members of the band, as well as a crew member. And what's especially awful about the story is that the band wasn't exactly blindsided by the accident, because just 2 days before the crash, they'd all seen 10-foot flames shooting out of the right engine of their Convair. As a result, they were intending to trade in their plane for a Learjet after using it for one final trip. During that flight, however, the Convair fell out of the sky into a Mississippi swamp. In total, 6 people were killed. So, how did the album connect to the tragedy? Well, for a start, the cover featured a photo of the band engulfed in flames. Beyond that, however, a number of lyrics made explicit reference to death, mortality, and the angel of darkness. Not that it's particularly strange for rock stars to sing about death, but the timing of this particular album and its prophetic lyrics were nonetheless deeply unfortunate. In April 2016, the idea that Prince predicted his own death was all over the internet, which certainly made for some sensational headlines at the time.
One song in particular is now generating new interest. Here's the question: did he predict his own death in lyrics he wrote decades earlier?
But did he really see it coming? Well, maybe, if you think that acknowledging your own mortality is kind of a prophecy. Many fans pointed to the fact that the purple-clad superstar sang about wishing life was never-ending and things never lasting on Sometimes It Snows in April from the 1986 album Parade. Other fans, meanwhile, highlighted the song Let's Go Crazy, in which Prince sings about elevators, just like how he was later found unresponsive in Yes, an Elevator. Spine-tingling or eye-rolling? You decide. There is at least one final piece of evidence that points to a genuine prediction by Prince. 3 years before he died from an overdose of fentanyl, Prince's sister Tyka Nelson says he called her and said, "I think I've done everything I've come to do." So yeah, maybe oblique references to elevators and by-the-numbers lyrics about death may not be much, but there is at least that. Jim Morrison was obsessed with death, so it might not come as a shock to find that he predicted his own demise. Frankly, the dude was so preoccupied with mortality that he probably predicted his own demise most nights of the week. And the only reason anyone even remembers this particular occasion was because he happened to get it right. Morrison wasn't exactly a specimen of good health either. Like many of his fellow rock superstars, he liked to live hard and was usually drunk or high on some substance or another. Now, when you're a hardcore drug user, you probably kind of know that you're going to end up killing yourself eventually. So it's not really that freaky to turn around and point out that you're going to die soon. But credit to him, Morrison's prediction was pretty specific. Shortly after the deaths of Jimi Hendrix and Janis Joplin, both musicians who died at the age of 27, Morrison, who was also 27, told a friend, "You're drinking with number 3. Not long after that, Morrison died unexpectedly in the bathtub of a Parisian apartment. His official cause of death was heart failure, but it seems more likely that he died from an overdose. Toward the end of her life, Debbie Reynolds was probably better known for being Carrie Fisher's mother than she was for her music. But early in her career, she had been a singer, most famously starring opposite Gene Kelly in the 1952 musical Singin' in the Rain. Reynolds had featured in a number of different musicals, as well as a good few Broadway productions, before going on to do a handful of more mainstream films. Along the way, she also became a parent, and her daughter became an even bigger star than her mother ever was. Reynolds was known to refer to Carrie Fisher's history of substance abuse as her demons, and often worried about losing her daughter. In the 2013 autobiography Unsinkable, Reynolds wrote, "It's not natural to outlive your child. This has always been my greatest fear. I don't know if I could survive that."
I share everything with my daughter. That's right. Especially the chip.
Just 3 years later, Fisher went into cardiac arrest while on a flight from London to Los Angeles and died at the age of 60. A day after her daughter's death, Reynolds was at her son's home planning the funeral when she suffered a stroke. She died at the hospital later that day, but not before telling her son, I miss her so much. I want to be with Carrie." Her son later told ABC News that Reynolds had died from heartache. Whitney Houston's health wasn't exactly in decline when she died. In fact, she was reportedly doing handstands beside the hotel pool just days before her death. But she did have a long history of drug abuse and had been on a particularly hard party streak at the time. So it's no huge shock to find that she might have known something bad was coming.
If you had to name the devil for you, the biggest devil among them?
That would be me.
Houston was in Los Angeles for a pre-Grammy Awards party and brought along some of her usual vices, but things quickly went wrong. On the afternoon of February 11, 2012, she was discovered dead in a hotel bathtub. The coroner ruled her death an accidental drowning, with contributing factors of cocaine use and heart disease. Houston was only 48, and her death was entirely unexpected, except maybe to Houston herself. According to TMZ, she had recently told friends that she thought the end was near, and had even said, "I'm gonna go see Jesus. I wanna see Jesus." Houston got her start as a gospel singer, so it wasn't unusual for her to talk about religion, but her friends said she had become a lot more spiritual during her final days. And there was no evidence that her death was anything other than an accident, so it does seem possible that she saw something coming that no one else could see. Just about everyone has had a death dream that seemed terrifyingly real, but for most of us, nothing ever comes of it. Buddy Holly had a dream about death that turned out to be prophetic in a terrifyingly specific way. And if that isn't quite enough, his wife Maria Elena also had a similar dream on the exact same night. In Maria Elena's dream, she was standing in a field and people were running past her. She looked up and saw a fireball falling from the sky, and then she heard a crash and an explosion. When she woke Holly to tell him about the dream, he said he'd also had a nightmare. In his dream, he was in an airplane with Maria Elena and his brother, but for some reason, he decided to leave Maria Elena behind, dropping her off on the top of a building. The thought that he would leave his wife behind upset him so much that as he described the dream to her, he burst into tears. Then, on February 3rd, 1959, Buddy Holly got in an airplane, leaving his wife behind. Shortly after midnight, the plane crashed into a field, killing all 4 people on board. His wife Maria later told the Avalanche Journal, "It was the only time I wasn't with him, and I blame myself because I know that if only I had gone along, Buddy never would have gotten into that airplane." Even when young stars are known substance abusers and seem to be careening toward certain doom, it's still shocking when they die young. Juice WRLD died 6 days after his 21st birthday, after suffering a seizure brought on by an overdose of oxycodone and codeine. And what's especially gut-wrenching is that he not only seemed to see it coming, he even wrote about it too. More specifically, the single Legends, from the album of the same name, makes an overt reference to the 27 Club, with Juice claiming that he wouldn't even make it past 21. It gets even weirder than that though. In the same song, Juice laments the passing of XXXTentacion, who had died at the age of 20. The lyric suggests that the rapper doesn't want to be known as a legend because they all seem to be dying out. Then, just before his death, he tweeted, "This life is yours. Do what TF you want. Do great things and change the world, and don't let no one tell you and you'll be bigger than Juice WRLD will ever be, and he's going down as a legend." Only a few days after declaring himself a legend, Juice WRLD was dead. That's not what you'd call a happy coincidence. In David Bowie's final video, he floats above the sheets of a hospital bed and backs into a wardrobe that looks an awful lot like a coffin. You might say this was Bowie predicting his own death, but that's not quite right. In fact, Bowie had a terminal diagnosis at the time and was well aware that he was dying when he was writing his final album, Black Star. But Bowie had known for years just how old he would be when he died. In the late 1970s, a psychic told him he would live to be 69 or 70. And Bowie didn't just laugh off the news. He actually put a plan into action. Mike Garson, who played piano for Bowie on 9 of his albums, later said the psychic Bowie consulted with was, quote, real, and that David knew it and he didn't doubt it for a second. He told me about it with certainty, accepted it, and planned for his future based on that. As it turned out, the age of death prediction turned out to be eerily accurate, and Bowie was right to pay attention. The iconic singer was diagnosed with liver cancer in 2014 and died from the disease just 18 months later at the age of 69. Despite the fact that Patsy Cline's career only lasted about 5 years, she has come to be recognized as one of the most iconic country music singers of all time, and she could have easily continued singing for decades. In fact, everyone thought Patsy had a long career ahead of her. Everyone except Patsy herself, that is. According to her friends, Klein herself always had a strange sense that she was going to die soon. And once, during a commercial flight to Kansas City, she was suddenly so overcome with a desire to write out her will that she scrawled it onto a piece of stationery. Then, in 1963, she reportedly told fellow singer Ray Walker that, after surviving 2 car accidents, she expected a third one to kill her. A week after telling him that, she died in a plane crash. Klein was 30 years old. Weezer's former bassist Mikey Welsh posted some scarily specific words to his Twitter account just 2 weeks before he died. In September 2011, Welsh wrote, "Dreamt I died in Chicago next weekend. Heart attack in my sleep. Need to write my will today." Then he went back and added, "Correction, the weekend after next." The 40-year-old was found unresponsive in his room at a Chicago hotel 2 weeks later, exactly as he'd predicted. An official cause of death was never released to the public, but authorities at the time believed it was a combination of prescription narcotics and heroin. As a result, many have speculated that Welsh took his own life, based on his struggles with his mental health and the fact that he had previously admitted to attempting to take his own life via drug overdose in 2001. 6 years later, he told the Salt Rock Plum Review, "I'm unable to replace my demons with anything. It's impossible. I'm only able to hide from them for a few hours a day, more or less." Not everyone believes that Welsh's death was intentional, though. In a statement, Weezer said, "We know damn well he would never have wanted to stop The Rock at today's Riot Fest, the show he was planning on attending. On the contrary, The Rock was what he loved, both in music and art."
How did this basketball player guess when and how he'd die? He's not the only notable athlete who seemed to know exactly when the Grim Reaper was coming. Al Joyner married his wife, track and field star Florence Griffith Joyner, a year earlier than they'd planned after a magnitude 5.9 earthquake hit Los Angeles. According to Al, she told him, "Let's go. I don't want to die without being married." He remembers his wife being completely serious and scared. It was the first time she'd mentioned her death to him, but it wouldn't be the last. Widely known by the nickname Flojo, Joyner was known to those around her to have a bit of the gift of premonition. One morning, she woke her husband up and told him, "Al, I had this dream and you were crying, and I was telling you I was all right and everything was fine, but I couldn't reach you. But I was telling you everything was fine. I just couldn't get to you. You should know this." Joyner eventually started writing letters to her young daughter Mary Ruth, sealing them and instructing Al to have her open them when she turned 16. Somehow, Florence seemed to know she wouldn't be there. One day she told Al, "I don't want to leave Mary without a mother. If something happens to me, I want you to get married again. You will get married again because I'll be the one to send her to you." Florence Griffith Joyner died of a seizure in her sleep in 1998 at the age of 38. Wrestling fans must grapple with the knowledge that the fighters entertaining them in the ring often don't get to enjoy long and happy retirements. Instead, an inordinate number of them die long before they reach old age. This is a well-known pattern, and one that has been noted for decades. In 2003, Real Sports with Bryant Gumbel dedicated an episode to looking into all the deaths of relatively young professional wrestlers. Rowdy Roddy Piper was interviewed about why he'd recently returned to the sport at the age of 49. He implied that it was due to a financial bind by asking rhetorically, "What would you have me do at 49? When my pension plan I can't take out until I'm 65.
I'm not gonna make 65. Let's just face facts, guys."
A few years later, while still wrestling, Piper was diagnosed with cancer, but he planned to get back in the ring after treatment. He ended up beating the cancer, but his hunch was ultimately right, as he indeed didn't make it to 65. He died in 2015 at the age of 61. He might have known close to the time that it was coming, at least if you believe Hulk Hogan. In an interview for A&E's biography episode on Piper, Hogan revealed that his friend left him a voicemail shortly before his death, saying that he'd seen the light and was walking with Jesus, and that he would pray for Hogan. Hogan listened to the voicemail only after he'd learned that Piper had died. James Hellwig was known to millions of wrestling fans as the Ultimate Warrior. In 1993, he even legally changed his name to just Warrior. So it was an emotional moment when he was inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame in 2014, and when he appeared on Monday Night Raw 2 nights later to mark the occasion. During the event, Warrior gave a moving speech about life, death, and legacy, which became rather eerie when he died within 24 hours of delivering that speech. Did he somehow know that he was going to die? He was only 54, and by all accounts, the heart attack that killed him was sudden and unexpected. But hearing the speech now makes you wonder if something supernatural was going on, as he said, "Every man's heart one day beats its final beat. His lungs breathe their final breath. And if what that man did in his life makes the blood pulse through the body of others and makes them bleed deeper than something larger than life, then his essence, his spirit, will be immortalized by the storytellers, by the loyalty, by the memory of those who honor him and make the running the man did live forever." When it comes to the most dangerous sports in the world, base jumping is definitely up there. It may very well be the most dangerous. So if you decide to take it up yourself, you have to accept the fact that death is a real possibility. Even so, it's still eerie to learn that someone who was going to die while base jumping within days posted a photo of himself along with someone who also died while doing the same activity. On May 8, 2015, Dean Potter uploaded a photo to Facebook of 4 men jumping off Yosemite's Half Dome, along with the caption, "This is one of my all-time favorite pictures of civil disobedience. I sure miss my friend Sean Leary. He's wearing the red rig in this picture." Leary had died the year before, while Potter would die 8 days after posting the photo. But the real prediction happened a year earlier, when Potter told Outside TV, "When I was a little boy, my first memory was a flying dream. In my dream, I flew, and I also fell."
I always wondered as I got older if I was, if it was some premonition of me falling to my death.
On May 16th, that dream would come true when Potter and a friend crashed into the mountain while base jumping off Yosemite's Taft Point. He was only 43. In his later years, Frank Pastore was best known as one of the biggest Christian radio hosts in the United States. But from 1979 to 1986, he was a Major League Baseball pitcher, playing all but his final season with the Cincinnati Reds. After his athletic career ended, he went to college and studied religion. He became a born-again Christian, and in 2004, he started broadcasting his radio show. On November 19, 2012, Pastore was discussing an episode of Morgan Freeman's TV show Through the Wormhole and reflecting on the idea of there being something more after you die. He mused, "Look, you guys know I ride a motorcycle, right? So at any moment, especially with the idiot people who cross the diamond lane into my lane, all right, without any blinkers, not that I'm angry about it, at any minute I could be spread all over the 210, but that's just my body part, and that key distinction undergirds the entire Christian worldview." This hypothetical scenario became real just 3 hours later. While driving home on the 210 freeway, a car in the next lane slammed into Pastore's motorcycle. He suffered major head injuries and spent the next month in the hospital. He passed away from his wounds on December 17th at the age of 55, after predicting what would kill him to a creepy degree. It's a matter of theology whether or not he was right about what came next. Sometimes, when claiming that someone predicted their own death, you can look at a vague statement that they made or a song lyric that they wrote about things ending, and then tenuously connect it to how they eventually die. But you don't have to do that with Pete Maravich. In 1974, Maravich had been playing in the NBA for 4 years. He was on the Atlanta Hawks, and he had a bit of a combative relationship with the fans. It all came to a head when one spectator held up a sign calling him a hot dog, so he sat down for an interview with the Beaver County Times, during which he admitted, "I don't want to play 10 years in the NBA and die of a heart attack at age 40. Maravich would go on to play another 6 years in the NBA, retiring in 1980. Then in 1988, he died from a heart attack at the age of 40. As sports writer Andy Nuzzo wrote afterward, "That's a little scary. The story was laying on my desk when I got to work. I read it and read it and read it and read it. I couldn't believe it. Everything matched."
The man known as the Pistol died of a heart attack.
On October 5, 1923, Jack Trice, the first black football player at Iowa State and the namesake of the school's current stadium, wrote a letter to no one in particular before a game against the University of Minnesota. It began, "To whom it may concern, my thoughts just before the first real college game of my life. The honor of my race, family, and self are at stake. Everyone is expecting me to do big things. I will. My whole body and soul are to be thrown recklessly about on the field tomorrow. Be on your toes every minute if you expect to make good." Trice would end up badly injured in that game and died 2 days later. On the same day as his death, C.L. Brewer, director of the Department of Physical Education at the University of Missouri, wrote to Iowa State. He informed them that under no circumstances should Trice be allowed to play in the upcoming games because of his race and the conditions at the time. Could Trice have been targeted by the Minnesota players because he was black? It seems reasonable that he thought it was a possibility. He did address his letter, to whom it may concern after all, which is somewhat odd. And Stephen L. Jones, who wrote the book Football's Fallen Hero, The Jack Trice Story, has said, I've talked to two people who had seen the play where Trice was injured. One person told me that nothing out of the ordinary happened, but another who saw it said it was murder.
Iowa State has the only football bowl subdivision stadium named for an African American.
Sam Okoroji's death on the soccer pitch in 1989 sent shockwaves through his home country of Nigeria, shortly before the end of a World Cup qualifying match against Angola. While play was paused as the referee gave an Angolan player a red card, Okoroji suddenly collapsed and started foaming at the mouth. He was pronounced dead at the hospital. His cause of death was determined to be a heart attack due to an enlarged heart and high blood pressure. He was only 25. Afterwards, multiple people claimed that Okoroji predicted his death beforehand. Nigerian goalkeeper David Ngodiga told SuperSport, Sam on that day seemed to know that he was leaving, so he told me in his exact words that, I am perching on the scrotum of someone. That person wants to strike, but he is being careful not to strike and miss. And he also warned me to be careful because he might not be around for too long. Furthermore, shortly before Okoroji died, when an interviewer asked him what he dreaded most, he reportedly replied, the word death strikes me hollow. Okoroji's brother Patrick also remembered something odd as he told the Nigerian newspaper The Punch, the only thing I could say that was like a premonition was, he said anybody that wanted to kill him then was coming late. He said, my head is too big and anybody with such plan is coming late.
No one knows exactly when they're going to die, but every once in a while, someone says something which inadvertently foreshadows the circumstances of their death. Sometimes, these people are famous. Here are some actors who predicted their own deaths. Oliver Reed was a legendary British actor best known for his roles in films like 1966's The Trap and 1968's Oliver. He may be most well known to modern audiences for his final role in Gladiator, but sadly, Reed actually passed away during the production of that film in 1999. Weirdly, he sort of predicted his death on a bizarre TV show called Without Walls, a documentary series on Britain's Channel 4 which had a few special episodes called The Obituary Show, wherein they would memorialize living famous people as if they had passed away. Most curious about these episodes was that the supposedly deceased person would actually say how they died in first-person language, as though they were reading a eulogy at their own funeral. Oliver Reed had such an episode in 1993, and in it, Reed described his own imaginary death, saying he died of a heart attack in a bar full of laughter where he was participating in a, quote, cabbage competition.
And I was very confident that for once I was going to win this vegetable competition.
It's unclear just what a cabbage competition is, but just 6 years later, Reed died in a bar in Malta, where he had been filming Gladiator, of a heart attack, and it was indeed during a competition. The competition in question was an Irish drinking contest, but despite there being no cabbage in sight, it's still a strange coincidence when you think about it. James Dean was Hollywood's original bad boy. His hobbies included acting and driving cars very fast. Naturally, it was the latter that eventually took his life. On September 30th, 1955, Dean was driving his Porsche 550 Spyder from Los Angeles to Salinas, California, when a man named Donald Turnipseed turned left out of an intersection. Dean, who was speeding, was unable to stop in time and crashed into Turnipseed's vehicle. Turnipseed and Dean's passenger both survived with minor injuries, but James Dean himself was killed by the impact. There's also a famous Hollywood story about this crash. On September 23rd, exactly 1 week before Dean's death, Sir Alec Guinness, best known to audiences today as Obi-Wan Kenobi, said he encountered Dean outside of a restaurant in Hollywood. When Dean showed his new car off to Guinness, he took one look at it and told Dean that he'd be dead within a week if he drove that car. But what's less known is that Dean predicted his death himself as well. In an interview filmed earlier in 1955, Dean talked about his drag racing hobby and was asked about driving too fast on highways. Dean claimed he had no urge to speed on the highway, which was obviously false, and said that it was dangerous because you couldn't know what other drivers might do. He said as a result, he had to be extra cautious driving on the highway and urged others to be careful too.
Take it easy driving. The life you might save might be mine.
Martial arts master and action film superstar Bruce Lee passed away unexpectedly at age 32 on July 20th, 1973, of a cerebral edema, exacerbated by a bad reaction to some medicine Lee had taken earlier that same day. The world and Lee's family were shocked. His son Brandon, only 8 years old, was deeply affected by his death, so much so that he apparently believed his family was cursed. According to Celebrity Ghosts and Notorious Hauntings by Mary D. Jones, Brandon believed his grandfather, Bruce's father, had been cursed after a business deal went bad, and that meant that his descendants were destined to live short lives. It had come true for his father, and Brandon felt he was next. According to his former girlfriend, Shannon Bradley Colleary, he once told her he thought he'd die even younger than his father. This came true on March 31st, 1993, when Brandon Lee was killed in an on-set accident while filming The Crow. He was accidentally shot after a prop mix-up. He was 28. While this is creepy enough on its own, it gets even weirder when you consider that his father's final movie, Game of Death, had to be changed after Bruce Lee's death. To explain his character being taken over by another actor, Lee's character fakes his own death after an assassin swaps out a fake bullet for a real one on a movie set. Beloved actress Carrie Fisher was best known for playing Princess Leia in the Star Wars saga, but she was also highly admired because of her no-nonsense stance on life in Hollywood, drug use, and mental illness. In the early 2000s, she became friends with singer James Blunt, the You're Beautiful guy. He and Fisher were such good friends that he actually moved in with her for several months while he recorded an album at a studio near her house. Sadly, Fisher passed away on December 27, 2016, at the age of 60. She had been in intensive care for several days after suffering a medical emergency on a flight from London to Los Angeles. Fans worldwide were devastated. But a few months after her passing, James Blunt had a very unsettling story to tell. According to Blunt, when he was staying in Fisher's house, she displayed some of her trademark dark humor by putting a cardboard cutout of herself as Princess Leia outside of his bedroom with her date of birth and a seemingly random date of death written on the cutout's forehead. While Blunt couldn't remember the exact date she had written there, he did recall that it ended up being very close to her actual death date. Blunt remembered because he thought it was too soon, which it absolutely was.
From prophetic dreams of presidents to the foreboding letters of mystics, these are the stories of politicians who saw their own deaths coming as they worked to change the world. The assassination of President John F. Kennedy has led to some of the most enduring conspiracy theories in American history. While the truth of who really shot Kennedy is still widely contested, it turns out that the man himself spent the last few years of his life haunted by the possibility of his own demise. In early 1964, former First Lady Jacqueline Kennedy gave a series of 7 undisclosed interviews that were later released as part of the 50th anniversary of JFK's administration. In one of them, she revealed that a year prior to her husband's death, the president had a feeling his first term in office would be fatally cut short. Due to his involvement with the Cuban Missile Crisis, he told his wife, "If anyone's going to kill me, it should happen now." Unfortunately, his worries didn't end there. The week leading up to his death, he had a conversation with his close friend Dave Powers, in which he admitted his trepidation about going to Texas. On the very morning of his assassination on November 22, 1963, Kennedy mused to both his wife and top aide Ken O'Donnell, "Last night would have been a hell of a night to assassinate a president." Later that day, O'Donnell determined that the lack of rain was a good omen and instructed the Secret Service to take the bubble top off of Kennedy's vehicle. Mere hours later, Kennedy was shot in that same car. Benazir Bhutto made history as Pakistan's first female prime minister. Her democratic-leaning politics cultivated many powerful enemies in the Middle East, including al-Qaeda and the Taliban and the Pakistani establishment, and she seemed aware of her fate long before her assassination. Her father, Zulfikar, a former Pakistani prime minister, had previously been assassinated by dictator General Zia-ul-Haq in 1977. Under Zia's rule, Bhutto was jailed as a political prisoner and encouraged to commit suicide by her guards. Bhutto was killed while giving a speech in December 2007, just days before the general election. The mystery still looms as to who was responsible, but evidence points to Islamic terrorists. A couple of months before her death, Bhutto had been living in self-imposed exile. For her own safety, the Pakistani government warned her not to come home, but she traveled back to try to claim a third term as prime minister. After surviving a suicide bombing shortly after her return, she remained undeterred. In fact, at the end of her autobiography, Daughter of Destiny, Bhutto wrote, "My death will be the catalyst of change." It seems Bhutto's foresight of this matter was fairly accurate, as soon after her assassination, the Pakistani People's Party came into power. California's first openly gay elected politician, Harvey Milk, was assassinated just a year after taking office on San Francisco's Board of Supervisors. Aside from being an LGBTQ trailblazer and an avid gay rights activist, Milk also famously sponsored an ordinance fining people for not cleaning up after their dogs, which is still in place today.
Some people are using pie tins, some people are using the Wall Street Journal, and other people are using doggy doos and shovels.
Milk knew that his progressive leadership would likely have consequences, as his very election threatened the status quo. Not long before he was assassinated, he recorded a final message to tape and instructed his associates to only share it if he was killed while in office. On the tape, Milk directly addressed his wishes for the movements he dedicated his life to supporting, saying, "Knowing that I could be assassinated at any moment or any time, I feel it's important that some people know my thoughts. If a bullet should enter my brain, let that bullet destroy every closet door in the country." In November 1978, Milk was killed in his City Hall office by another San Francisco politician. He was 48 years old. According to Maclean's, a month before his death in March 2011, Pakistani cabinet minister Shahbaz Bhatti told Canadian politician Jason Kenney that he expected to be killed. It is likely that Bhatti, who was the only Christian member of Pakistani President Asif Ali Zardari's cabinet, was killed by Muslim extremists. Bhatti had been calling for changes to Pakistan's blasphemy laws, which prohibit citizens from speaking against the Prophet Muhammad. For decades, the laws have been used to persecute hundreds of the nation's religious minorities, a group Bhatti himself was a part of. At the time of his death, only 5% of Pakistan's population practiced Christianity. Bhatti decided to travel to Europe, the United States, and Canada to seek protection for religious minorities in his country after a governor of one of Pakistan's provinces was killed by his own bodyguard just weeks before. While in Canada, Bhatti told Kenney that he'd been denied additional security and was almost certain he'd be killed soon. When Kenney suggested that he not return to Pakistan without additional protection, Bhatti said he had no choice and asked Kenney to look after his family in the event of his death. In 2008, Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi gave a speech at that year's summit of Arab leaders. He spoke at length about the fall of Iraqi President Saddam Hussein at the hands of the American military, despite his former allyship with American leaders. Gaddafi expressed fear that other leaders at the summit might meet the same fate, saying, "One of these days, America may hang us." Gaddafi's concerns were based on the possible seizure of Libyan oil reserves. They were the largest in the African continent and worth billions of dollars a year. In 2011, Libyan rebels and NATO jets invaded the Libyan capital, Tripoli. While Gaddafi called on supporters to band together and defend Libya, he also made it public that he believed there was an active conspiracy to seize his country's oil supply. 2 months later, he was killed.
He never did flee, and today he died at the hands of his own people.
What's even eerier about Gaddafi's speech is that Syrian dictator Bashar al-Assad was in the audience laughing at Gaddafi. Assad would later be accused of mass torture and crimes against humanity by the international legal community. During the bloody and divisive American Civil War, Abraham Lincoln predicted that he would be killed for his political leadership decisions. At the time, tensions were astronomically high in the country as the North and South fought over the conflict that would change the very fabric of the young nation. According to teachinghistory.org, just days before his assassination at Ford's Theater on April 14, 1865, Lincoln recalled a recent dream he had to a small group that included his friend and former law partner, Ward Hill Lemon. According to Lemon, in the dream, Lincoln walked into the East Room of the White House to find a covered dead body surrounded by soldiers and a mourning crowd. When he asked one of the soldiers who had died, the soldier responded, "The president. He was killed by an assassin." According to a PBS documentary on Lincoln's assassination, he also shared a dream he'd had the night before he died, in which he was sailing over an unknown body of water. Reportedly, this was a recurring dream Lincoln had before important Civil War milestones occurred. It's worth noting that all these anecdotes should be taken with a grain of salt, as Lincoln admitted that he did not believe dreams had any literal significance, and many historians have questioned the validity of Lemon's account. In the weeks leading up to his death, French Emperor Napoleon Bonaparte amended his will. Seemingly convinced that he would be assassinated, the 51-year-old exile wrote, "I die before my time, murdered by the English oligarchy and its assassin." According to the American Museum of Natural History, there's a popular theory that Napoleon was killed by arsenic poisoning due to the pristine condition of his body years after his death. However, to this day, there is no concrete proof that he was actually poisoned. Furthermore, even if arsenic was the cause of his death, his passing may have resulted from long-term exposure to the element through fumes given off by the wallpaper in his prison home.
The sad thing is, we may never know the real truth.
Whether his life was ended deliberately or not, the former military commander's edits to his will provide ample evidence that he sensed the end was coming. Both Alexander Hamilton and Aaron Burr were extremely ambitious and accomplished in their own right. They occasionally butted heads on the political stage, and when Burr ran for governor of New York in 1804, Hamilton made it his mission to keep Burr from winning. According to PBS, Hamilton's aggressive campaign against his rival propelled Burr to take action in defense of his own honor. The common belief is that Burr challenged Hamilton to a duel, and that Hamilton was initially hesitant to accept the call. Needless to say, the founding father proceeded with the duel in spite of his early reluctance. After accepting the challenge, Hamilton wrote what some considered a calculated farewell letter to his wife Eliza, in which he indicated that he hoped to achieve martyrdom as a result of the confrontation. Hamilton noted that he opposed dueling and that taking a life was against his Christian principles. According to HistoryNet, he even claimed that he didn't intend to fire at Burr when the time to draw came, effectively committing suicide.
I think there could have been an easy way out of it, but he decided that he needed to defend his honor.
In spite of this claim, evidence suggests that Hamilton may have indeed fired his gun, but the exact truth behind the events of that fateful day may never be known for sure. Russian mystic Grigory Rasputin was a mysterious presence who held great influence over the last Romanov family, headed by Tsar Nicholas II. Rasputin terrified Russian nobles and members of the royal family because of his strong favor with Nicholas and his wife Alexandra, and many were plotting to get rid of him. Rasputin was ultimately assassinated by a group of nobles in December 1916. According to his secretary Aron Simonovich, Rasputin wrote a letter the month he was killed, and his predictions would prove eerily accurate. Having survived a previous assassination attempt, the second one would prove fatal, not only for him, but for the Romanovs as well. He wrote, "If it was your relations who have wrought my death, then none of your children will remain alive for more than 2 years." Less than 2 years later, Nicholas II's family was executed.
Your reputation precedes you.
If Rasputin's prophetic letter was indeed real, it may have been a major reason why Nicholas II feared for his and his family's lives leading up to their ultimate demise. After all, in spite of Rasputin's prediction, a member of the royal family had killed the holy man. Nicholas's abdication in 1917 was another clear sign that he feared for his and his family's future. Revolution was on the horizon, and threats of a forceful transference of power were in the air. After giving up his birthright as Tsar, Nicholas wanted to travel to the United Kingdom to go into exile. However, he could not find asylum there. On the day of his abdication, he wrote in his diary, "All around is treason, cowardice, and deceit." A little over a year after abdicating, Nicholas, his wife and children, their family doctor, and various servants were all escorted to the cellar of a building in which they were being held by Soviet guards. A statement of condemnation was then read aloud. Countless gunshots, stabbings, and beatings immediately followed, killing the entire family and their staff. Two of America's founding fathers, Thomas Jefferson and John Adams, both died on the nation's 50th anniversary, July 4th, 1826. Their simultaneous passings weren't exactly predicted, but there is cause to believe that they were planned to some extent. Both men had been very ill leading up to their deaths. 83-year-old Jefferson had reportedly refused his usual medication the night before he passed, and according to history, future President John Tyler later eulogized that Jefferson had repeatedly expressed his desire to die on the 4th of July. Adams and Jefferson were polar opposites, though later in life they became great friends in spite of their rivalry. In fact, before Adams died, his last words were, "Thomas Jefferson still survives." Curiously, Jefferson had passed away just hours before. Many explanations have been posed for this unlikely coincidence. Then Senator Daniel Webster claimed divine intervention. In his eulogy for Jefferson and Adams, he observed, "Who is not willing to recognize in their happy termination, as well as in their long continuance, proofs that our country and its benefactors are objects of his care." It's also legitimately possible that both men simply managed to hold on for the sake of witnessing their country's anniversary. In the centuries since the founding fathers died, lots of people have theorized that humans may have the power to stay alive for a specific event or holiday. While this may just be an overly romanticized American origin story, it's still worthy of speculation.